Hello, everyone. Beyond the title of this episode, how far will an eternal vision take us? The reason I titled today's episode The Eternal Vision is usually I like to, put in more words for the titles, like for example, Remembrance of the Eternal Vision. But I wanted to speak about these three words, the eternal vision, not because I'm also writing something titled that, like a book, but at the same time, it is something that many have not dared to answer. Because in trying to create an answer, in trying to have an explanation, we are solidifying reality in our minds from expanding. So, in some sense, we as creatures do not just share a common world, but we have all found a way of speaking. And so, language has become that technology that connects the minds of men. For me, life has a microcosmic presence and a macrocosmic presence. And inevitably, or not inevitably, but in conclusion, it is one presence that has different dimensions. We start off with our eyes being opened. We engage the world, and our attention maneuvers us, and we begin to slowly get sculpted into a name and personality. We identify with this name and personality, for whenever we hear the sound, it's as if we have heard a doorbell, as if we have to run our attention to where our name's being called. So what I'm trying to get to is that we have a sort of subjective existence going on, a sort of subjective realm. Behind your eyes, worlds dance all the time. And we begin to try to interpret the world. So what I find is happening is that at first I consider we have two eyes that see. We are in some sense simulating the objective realm in our subjective realm, then stretching it based on considerations and uh, different forms of access um, into a sort of past and future. So what I'm trying to tell you is that time is not in your watch. Your watch is an object. Time is the consideration of your intelligence. Your intelligence has a sort of witnessing quality in the sense that just like how you see your hands, in some sense you can kind of, if you're sensitive, just very easily notice that in every birthday you've ever had, you've blown a candle, you've celebrated a new beginning, but you have always been the same moment. There is an intelligence within the being that has watched it since its existence. This watching, this witnessing, it cannot be bound to thought, but thought is its last bunker. Because enlightenment is a sort of roar. I think it happens if people tell me what enlightenment is. It is a roar of clarity, but a clarity of one's true nature that goes beyond the boundaries of language and dualism. So we find that we have storified the world and we are watching its objectivity take place. And so, based on our capacity to take journeys, in some sense, we have. How can I tell you? It's as if like our evolved consciousness compared to every other species on this planet is like uh, the cherry on the cake. It is something extra that has presented itself through nature. So I find that when the concept of eternity comes, we at first look at the opposite of eternity. We look at the temporary and we're like, okay, so our existence seems to us as temporary. We seem to be these biologically changing objects that are present in their form, like in the form that you are for a certain time, and then it all changes, you know? then it's like the final curtains are pulled and the performance of subjectivity has to isolate, or not isolate, but detach from the body. So what that means is if there is an intelligence within you beyond the dimensions of perception, and in some sense it is neither physical or subjective, it is as if like when you, of course I'm being too bold here and trying to explain this, but this is a viewpoint I have, so I feel it needs to be shared. And so what I'm saying is that when it's like this is a view like this is, let's say that you can theorize this at least, that if there is something more than the body and the subjective realm, our thoughts, then, or let's say our mind, mind is like how imagination is and memory are put in one domain, you know. So pretty much what I'm saying is you lose your body, let's say the final curtains are pulled, the dying man experiences his body crumble, dissolve into nature, the forces that were in some sense borrowed are returned, and then one begins to see that there's a detachment from the physical, but that sometimes causes people to get attached to the mental. And what I mean by that is in time spoke against idol worship, but in today's society we are all stuck in idea worship. We are all worshiping ideas as if our future is a thought that we have to make real, you know. And in often cases that's kind of like it is like that, but at the same time there's more to it, because the story you tell yourself suggests the limitations of your view. So for me it's like life is this kind of journey where it's like I'm this intelligence, and as this intelligence, how can I tell you, like, think of it this way, think of existence being a conscious chemical reaction of different levels of intelligence and energetic expression. So what I'm saying is that the mind begins to slowly step out of the room of multidimensionality. And so it's as if at first infinity is like the coolest concept, and it applies to all emotions. Imagine having infinite joy, imagine having infinite pride, infinite honor, all this. These are in some sense attractive, but they're attractive because infinitude suggests that an individual can attain a state of unending vision, right? So it's like as if, like, how can I tell you? Back in the day, there was the story called the story of Babylon and the Tower of Babylon. And so the story is that all the human beings have united and gathered around, and they all speak one common language of humanity. And so they're building this great tower to go above the clouds and perceive the gods, Now, as this tower rises with endless effort, as if this humanity wants to elevate beyond its boundaries, And so what happens is the gods look at this and they're like, oh my God, people are climbing up this tower to come to, our level, And so what happens is that the gods, one of the gods does something, I don't know if one of them, but pretty much like the gods, like what happens is that they make the human beings speak different languages, and in doing so, they cannot be in a sort of harmonious. Heaven is an imaginary concept, and some will argue it obviously is, but I will tell you, heaven is not a location. Heaven is a state of mind. It is a state of mind where an opportunity of a lifetime presents itself, and instead of having people being caught in games of inferior minds, we need the superiority of intelligence to command a new playing field. We need to create better games for people to be involved in, but these games are neither digital, they are neither linguistic. These games are, how can I I keep saying story of the Tower of Babylon to reach the gods, because there is a sort of separation imposed by higher dimensions on this lesser dimension of intelligence. What happens is that, not what happens, but kind of what I'm saying, what Mr. Within is saying is that we as a species, our minds are now trying to create the tower. to reach the gods. You know, we have our imagination has infused with our simple evolution, making it complex beyond dreams. You know. So here, let's say, you know, someone was curious. Let's say Mr. Within was sitting in the park and somebody came up to Mr. Within and it's like, "Yo, man, tell me what is eternal in this world? Tell me like what it is, right?" And so we will go into this abstract arena of exploration where we begin to consider, okay, existence seems to have an eternal quality. It's as if like there's no lack of existence anywhere, you know, even though it seems that everything's held in space, but it's as if like existence seems to be going on, right? And so we begin to see what else seems to be going on. So like let's say an eternal principle is the principle of that existence continues to exist, you know. And another principle would be that change is an eternal quality. This is why some of the greatest warriors were not those warriors who demands a new behavior. Every moment demands a new command and new abidance. The concept of abidance is very similar to listening, and it becomes relevant when the person begins to establish a relationship with their intuition that is at first masked in thoughts and ideas and stories. What that means is many people see synchronicity and they're like, "Oh my God, angels!" You know, they see synchronicity and coincidences. They say it is miracles, and so we see that the person establishing a sort of imaginary powered momentum where he's beginning to allow the inner realm to be more of more of the judge's hammer than the physical realm. When this happens, it does make life more relaxed because in some sense, like this is what scientists I find that they fail to see. You know, religion might rationally be inferior to science, but religion provides a remedy, I find, and it's not the best remedy, but it provides a remedy that it acknowledges the subjective self's eternity. That is the power of heaven, the idea of it, not even like the actual, you know, like I'm saying, the idea of heaven, it was in like the minds of man. They're like, the idea of me can continue, my consciousness can continue. Yeah, that looks reasonable to me, you know, I'm gonna go with it. It's like a kind of Wheel of Fortune thing, you know, or like a Jeopardy kind of thing where the person has to choose. They have to choose what they will enter. And so Mr. Within is pretty much suggesting here that in my experiences, I mean, that's the whole talk in some sense, I'm sharing my experience. An eternal vision was for me was the presence of a collective being. And so there's two sides to it. There's a philosophical side to you know, the eternal vision that I've experienced, and there is a very like just like it was a sort of meditative thing, which I'm going to explain very simply, you know. But I'm going to go into the philosophy of it first. Okay, or actually, I'll just say it how it is. You know, I had a moment where I experienced a sort of chaos. When chaos became my mirror, I felt my true self was convinced of emptiness. I felt like my conscience was empty. And when I came to this point, when I say my conscience was empty, like I don't mean there isn't like an inner guiding voice. I mean like I'm not denying the logos. I'm just saying that I had a moment of silence and solitude and stillness. It was a meditative moment. In that moment, every idea of myself was kind of like, it's as if my memory and imagination were no longer me. I was observing them. I was watching them. And it was as if like like my whole life, not my whole life, but it's like I began believing I was a body. I began believing I was a thought. Then you know, started thinking I'm a thought. Then I began and saw I am not a thought, neither the body or a thought. And so I became a sort of presence of the moment's mind, which is of a universal, it has a universal quality for me. So what that means is that I experienced the moment where conceptually there could be no denial or acceptance of eternity. It was as if like the clue is emptiness. To eternal life, the clue is emptiness. And what that means is what doesn't work must go away for what works to arrive. And so in that moment, I was a sort of selfless existence. I wouldn't say I was an individual. I wouldn't say I wasn't an individual, but I could tell you it wasn't important because there was a sort of collective presence, as if like I lived my whole life thinking I'm a drop. And in that witness, there's no separation, and man has always been home, and home has always been the beyond. And from the beyond and from the unknown comes the essence of true knowledge. For me, the logos, the intuition, its position. It is the introducer of the unknown, as if the unknown was a sculptor, and my knowledge was constantly based on every experience I had getting updated. I began to see it. I began to see life happening prior to thought. Every child is in this state, you know, and then they're not. I found it funny how some religions say the child is too young to go to hell, as if the child doesn't know, so it won't get punished. So it seems that this knowledge brings a sort of responsibility for future outcome. It has always been like that. It's as if like knowledge is the flashlight. You see more of the forest, you have more things to work with, and hence you have more responsibility. But the concept I'm trying to focus here is, in that moment, I was experiencing the hollowness of my identity, because I realized prior to me identifying as a sort of unique thing, as a sort of like, okay, my name is Amin. I was born in Iran. Lived in Canada afterwards. You know, I like to write. Like all these things. All these things were a sort of mask I was wearing, never questioning the mask because it was providing, a sort of good attendance. Believe it or not, I had to forget my world to remember who I am. And who I am is not a sort of I amness. Who I am is a moment of self-awareness where the self realizes it is pure awareness. And in that pure awareness, there is no expectation. And what that means is that time defines the temporary. But what defines time? What is that secret in the glare within your third eye? I considered it an eternal vision because I suddenly noticed my subjective self being managed from a non-subjective and non-objective awareness. I don't know what else to say about it aside from it seemed like when chaos and order were done fighting, they realized they were the same moment. You realize that karma will continue until you step out of that vehicle of thought. There's two ways to truth, I find. One is to keep looking for it, and the other is to forget the search and realize that you're already there. Because you are your newest self, and you are also the witness of that newest self, and that which is the witness of the new self is not ideological. So here's the philosophy aspect of it, I guess, where I'm saying you're not a thought and you're not your emotions either. Because your emotions have a relationship with thought, which is in some sense a suggestion they're in the same room, they're in the same frequency, and hence they're the same. You have too many thoughts, it influences your emotions. And when I say have thoughts, I don't think that thoughts, we are not thinkers, we are receivers and interpreters of waves of intelligence that are thrown at us from various positions. All right. Eternal vision is seeing emptiness, not because the container of reality in some sense is broken. It's as if we are saying the self is like a glass cup, and this is filled with water, filled with different experiences and different things the person has been through. What I'm saying is that you witness this glass break, and which means the limits of yourself become non-existential. Any sort of incapable self or idea of failure suddenly becomes nullified and non-existent. In that non-existence, you perceive. And what is perceiving is non-local. And non-local comes across to an individual being as collective. But in its utter essence, it is a state of being that cannot be stated. Trying to think what's a nice story I can share here. There's the story of the Sufi mystic poet named Rumi, and this kid is in his like mid-20s. He's sitting by a fountain, reading a science book at the time, and this is like, I don't know, 700 years ago or something. Technology's not involved, so that's a rare book in his hand, and the kid's just reading it scientifically and whatnot, you know. Reading the science book, and so out of nowhere, and this is a story of Rumi, and it's an ancient story, I consider. And so what happens is that out of nowhere, this Sufi dervish, this like just a second, guys, I gotta take this. الو سلام من وسط کاری هم دارم یه چیزی ضبط میکنم بعد بهت زنگ میزنم کنم. Okay, where was I? This roaming kind of Sufi mystic, this very like spiritual wild man, comes out of nowhere, and he comes to this kid and he says, "Kid, what are you reading?" And the kid looks at the guy, and he sees like he came out of a forest, and he has a huge beard, and the guy's like clothing is not that clean or whatever, so he's like, this is a savage in front of me. So he looks at the man and he says, "Nothing you would understand, old man. This book is the newest sciences of the time." And then he turns away. And so in other words, he's hitting that old man with arrogance. And so this spiritual wild man, later on, this man is known as Shams Tabrizi, and he becomes Rumi's guru years later. But this is the idea, right? He looks at the kid, yeah, and he like, the kid's like smug and all that, with a certain arrogance, and he says, he takes the kid's book and throws it in the fountain, and the kid is watching the ink being destroyed from that piece of from that book, and realizing knowledge is being destroyed in front of them by the savageness of a spiritual wild man. And so how the story goes is this young Rumi looks at this, Shams, and says, how could you do this? Do you know what you have done? You have destroyed the most advanced knowledge of the time. And this is where Shams speaks. Shams dry and untouched, as if it never hit the water. And so Rumi is standing there in shock, and Shams, this spiritual wild man, looks at him and says, knowledge that can be wiped with water is no knowledge at all. In other words, seek that which, if I can say this, probably it's not a word, but eternalizes, eternal, not internalize, eternalizes your life force compared to things that make you accept the temporary, because what else can you do if you think that way? Life is unknown. Life is unknown. The cosmos is unknown. A lot of this is unknown. Your moment is unknown. And to be satisfied by knowledge and beliefs, it is a performance. It is a theatrical performance for the vast unknown that's still unexplored. And that's the problem of this overpopulated planet. And overpopulation is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you think that people are bodies. That's when overpopulation is horrifying, because we feel the resources are going to be depleted. But overpopulation also suggests that there is way more minds and way more problem solvers on the planet than ever before. And if the species is capable, of creating a community, creating a society that rather than rewards violent strength, it begins to reward novelty and an ability to allow great ideas to come forth. There's a person named Lauren Harris. He has a very nice quote. He says, art is the beginning of vision into the realm of eternal life. I'm going to share one last quote. It's by a person named Ayn Rand, A-Y-N space R-A-N-D. Throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads, armed with nothing but their own vision. I find that this quote beautifully represents what society requires. Taking new steps into the unknown rather than constantly trying to reshape the past when the future awaits. A new world can instantly be decided upon. Seldom is it said, but the eternal self is selfless. It is how you're not just being your physical body in the moment. Your consciousness is the moment. The moment is how your mind is occurring, and the witness of a changing moment is a changeless being. There is something within every being that knows the source. The effect must only remember the cause to no longer be an effect of it. I hope this talk has served you. And just a bonus quote by George Eliot: "It is never too late to be who you might have been." Nothing inspires man, nothing cures depression and stress as the recognition of every human form's inevitable mortality. Once you realize that you are here for a little while, you can't be pissed off anymore. You can't be sad or corrupt. You embrace life with an elegance of the style of how your mind lives. This was what I didn't understand, but I noticed as a kid there were some people who, when they entered the room, they had a unique presence. And I always wondered, what is it about their presence? And I realized it is their eyes. It is how far they have seen, you know. And this is why in India, of course, now it's kind of like in this consumerist kind of, you know, there's consumerism is like, you know, destroying authentic Vedanta. But if we are a way of the universe to know itself, eternal vision is a remembrance of your true nature. Much blessings and namaste. Beyond the dreams of man, a cosmic truth is edgeless. Much blessings and namaste.